Hi everyone, Evette Rose here, and welcome to Finding Your Spirituality Summit. And guys, I'm so excited that here today I have Jeremiah Abrams. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
So happy to have you. And for those of you who are new here, Jeremiah was a freelance journalist. He's a professor in Jungian. He was also working in psychology, and he also been in that field for almost 35 years. He has a BA in literature, also in history. He's also a psychotherapist, and he has a diploma in family systems and also in Gestalt. He also has done psychodrama, and also he's an expert in human shadow and breathwork, and I can absolutely testify to that because I've done holotropic breathing also with him, which was an absolutely amazing experience. And Jeremiah, you've also written amazing books. He's written Meaning the Shadow, and also The Hidden Power of the Dark Side, and also Of Human Nature. And then another beautiful one was Reclaiming Your Inner Child. So thank you so much for being here. It's an absolute pleasure to have you.
I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So this is going to be a really, really powerful topic here that we will be addressing today, which is all about finding our spirituality. Because when I look at what we've been through with COVID, when I look at where people have been, the things that we've gained, but also the things that we've lost in one way or another, we would always say that sometimes things that we lost, it's good that it dropped away. But some things that we also lost is not always necessarily that, I would say, that positive, because we lose and we become disconnect from things because of stress, because of trauma, because of fear. Because all these strong emotions, it pulls us into such a different negative state that we don't really have that beautiful open flow and vulnerability and capacity to feel our inner voice, to feel our intuition, to feel a sense of connectedness to our spirituality. And so many people I've seen, and I see it with students, I see it with clients, where they've lost that connection, where they've lost that relationship between themselves and the spirit, and with their own spirit as well, and always looking outside of themselves for answers and for just things that they shouldn't be really looking forward to or towards, that is not really supporting or sustaining their highest and best, because that's now what I would call, in a different way, coping mechanisms. And certain patterns that can come forward as well that just pulls people away further and further. And so I'm sure that you've seen also the patterns of fear that's been coming up.
Yes. Well, I think my word that I prefer is reflection. That when people are in a contracted state, they don't reflect on their experience the same way. There's a kind of anxiety response that people are having right now. The world is in an anxious state.
Yeah.
You don't know what's around the corner, and you're unable to look around the corner. So that's where we are right now. Yeah. Hopefully it will settle down, but it's, I think, adjusting to just the anxiety in the world right now is important, so that you do make time to reflect on your experience. Yeah. So.
How did you, and I love how you say how to adjust to the anxiety, how to adjust to how circumstances are right now. How did you find yourself adjusting? Because you went through your own challenges apart from COVID, apart from lockdown as well.
Yeah. Well, I discovered I had some medical challenges that I had to handle. And, so I was kind of took precedence over the whole pandemic problem, but I've been managing. I've had a lot of support through the medical process. I had to have a procedure done, and medicine, you're taking substances that affect your awareness, and I was pretty brain fogged through the whole experience. So I've been practicing safe precaution here. We live in Indonesia, where there's been a kind of concerted effort to keep people safe. But I didn't experience anxiety of the pandemic so much as the life-threatening procedure I was required for the life-threatening illness I had. I may be exaggerating it, but you're caught in that system where, you're getting information that your body's failing. So I'm fine now. I managed just fine. So
That's wonderful. And you also used your own tools to move through that. We're going to be diving into that in a few minutes of a minute. I'm just leaving a bit of a cliffhanger here for everyone, because ultimately at the end of the day, one thing that I absolutely love so much about you is that you really practice what you preach. You really incorporate that in your life. And I see you doing that. I see you living your message through your people and through your students. You really come from a place of vast experience and vast learning, and to communicate and formulate that in such an amazing, understandable way. And I say that because I actually did holotropic breathing with you. I've known you for a few years, and I've seen you teach. I've seen you really step into your power and that space that you hold, and how you hold that space for other people as well, not just for others, but for you at the same time. Now, being where you are, being in this place of emotional awareness and mental awareness and physical awareness as well, you haven't always been there. That was a journey in itself, how you progressed into that beautiful place and space where you're at right now. I'm curious, how did your spirituality start? How did your journey start? Like, where were you in your life even? Let me ask it this way. Where were you in your life before you were introduced to spirituality?
Interesting question. Let me just look at that. I think I was born into a family that was quite religious in the sense of practicing. My father had what I would call the charisma of faith. He didn't have to question what he was doing, he just did it. And had a very strong faith-based environment I was born into. Of course, I rebelled from it, and I didn't want to participate, but it was there, and I came from an extended family of people who had the same kind of faith. So I didn't really want to take it on because my soul didn't seem to resonate with it. And that was some consternation on my father's part, for sure. So
you rejected it. How did you? So you said there was a misalignment. What did that feel like? Because sometimes people actually right now watching are in misalignment to something, and they try to push through it. They try to make it work, but they don't know how to recognize when they are misaligned with something that's maybe not meant for them.
Well, I was quite adamant about it, and I think I didn't want to hurt my father's feelings, but it wasn't, the practice of my ancestry was not working for me, and I had to be realistic about it. I think it came to a head when I was at university, and I was being drafted by the Army. And during that period, I had to have a very soul-searching dialogue with myself about what I was going to do. And so I had to, what I decided to do was become a conscientious objector. And during that period, I had to actually confront that, let's say, the ancestry experience with religion and spirituality, and actually formulate for the government a reason why I didn't want to go off to war and kill people, And so I had to coalesce all of the sense of what I was becoming into a statement that in an inadvertent way rejected the religion of my parents, and it caused some consternation on my father's part. We worked it out.
Oh, you did?
Maybe I was a 21-year-old at the time, so. But it was really bringing to awareness and articulating a belief system when I was that age.
That's amazing, because you already recognized from such an early age that your dad's religion was not your religion. It was not your spirituality, but it was his spirituality.
I knew that. I didn't take up the practice. I wasn't that enthusiastic. It wasn't about making my father wrong. It just didn't quite fit for me. And I wasn't out there searching for an alternative, but by necessity, I had to actually articulate what I did believe. If I wasn't believing what my family believed and inherited, I had to actually articulate it. In a very short essay, I had to make a statement to avoid the draft ostensibly, but it was more about, what was my philosophical and spiritual position. And of course, it worked. Draft boards, they just thought I was gay or something,
Oh, wow.
They didn't say that, but that's the way most of these primitive things happen. I wasn't gay, but I was actually doing something that I felt committed to, and this was at a time when there was a war being conducted by the American government that I didn't believe in, so it was political as much as it was spiritual.
Right.
But I had to take a stand. So it turns out that it forced me to articulate a belief system of my own.
Okay. So it actually made you go deep within to feel everything that I've been resisting, why, and if the resistance, what is in the absence of the resistance, what would that then look like? Because that's what's left. That's what you then actually end up believing in. So you really had to go deep within to find those little details.
I really tried not to over-intellectualize it. I really believed in nonviolence. It was a kind of Gandhian position I was taking, so I had to actually try to embody that in words and in how I was behaving as well. So it was, it confronted the whole idea in my mind of having a belief system, and one you could live by. That worked successfully to avoid the draft, but it wasn't just about that. It actually disrupted the continuity of my ancestry as well. So, but it set me in a pretty good place of just being open to other ways of thinking about how to satisfy that spiritual curiosity. The hunger for meaning is behind the spiritual impulse, and I was having to generate meaning in my life based on something very practical and tangible, whether I was going to go do the bidding of an unjust war was a challenge. And I at the time, I was also counseling other people not to participate in the war. That's how I got involved in it. I wasn't just anti-war, I was actually participating in the Friends Service Committee, counseling people who didn't believe in war. And, I didn't become a Quaker, but it was pretty close to what I was doing, You know about the Quakers?
No.
The Quakers are, I wouldn't call them necessarily Protestant, but they're they are in a lineage of peacefulness. They hold Quaker meetings. I think it came out of practices in England where they would meet. The Quaker house is a meeting house where you are just being real with everyone in your community and highly principled, but also nonviolent. So I didn't become a Quaker, but I was using the principles of that Quakerism to counsel other people who had a conscience. Conscientious objector I took quite literally as about having a conscience. So that was formative for me. I really made a strong stand to help other people as well as help myself. And it was a turbulent time. We didn't have a pandemic going on. Then we had an unjust war being conducted for the silliest of reasons. And I was certainly radicalized in terms of my awareness of political forces in the world. Shortly thereafter, that's when I was really being a journalist as well. After that period of my life, I transitioned into the helping professions quite naturally from that work and began from the, say, counseling war resistors to taking on a different kind of counseling and started humbly, quite naturally. It was like a calling that came to me. So
it's like a natural curiosity to understand the human psychology, but also to be of service at the same time. Like you clearly had a strong calling to be in service, and it just
that was it.
Naturally unfolded for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful.
How I got there, I mean, the circuitous route did have a theme of service. I was, because there was an atmosphere in the culture itself that was very disruptive to a lot of people's lives. There was a need, wasn't being articulated quite well enough, but I eventually found myself gravitating toward working with other people who were had the same feeling, and I became part of an organization. We established a nonprofit in Cambridge, Massachusetts, actually, to do counseling.
Okay.
And at the time, we found public funding through the drug rehab, organization of the state, and it was, it was very clever the way we were able to set up a counseling center based on social problems.
Yeah.
And we got the seed money from the state for a couple of years, and that set into motion a kind of grassroots career for me. We didn't start with going to get a university degree. We started by training ourselves by doing the work in the field.
Yeah.
And then as a result, we trained each other. We began to hire people to train us. We found teachers and mentors. Some of us went back to graduate school. Wow. I did. Some of us just worked in the field.
I have to ask, because you kept bumping up the level, you kept wanting to learn more. What is it that you felt was driving you to learn more? Because this is part of where your spirituality was just naturally unfolding. I'm just curious, what was that push?
Well, when you're taking on the task of working with people, the helping profession itself, there's a need to understand.
Yeah.
And you're not just polishing up a career, but you're deepening your self-knowledge and your skills. And so there was a kind of a necessity in the helping profession that it does require you to work on yourself.
Yeah.
And so all of us, I was with a cohort of people who were doing the same thing, and we were training each other, and we were all interested in perfecting the instrument that we were. So it set me into motion in that way, and I was being supervised by people who were more skilled than me. I would hire supervisors to work with me and make sense of the work I was doing.
So as you were also on this journey and you were progressing through that, was there anything specifically that stood out for you that you felt was maybe holding you back or hindering your progress from really embarking on the spiritual journey that was opening up for you? Was there maybe like sabotage, or was there maybe any big challenges within you from the past that came up that maybe felt you a little bit like, wow, I need to maybe take a break from this, or?
Well, because I had acted let me be psychological about it. I mean, I was somewhat anti-authoritarian in my behavior in terms of saying no to the war and so on. I think I had some issues with authority, and I didn't really want to become part of a system, As I progressed in the field, I realized I needed to develop credentials, so I figured out how to do that in the minimal kind of way by getting a licensure through the state. At the time I was starting to do this, it also was a time when state governments were granting licenses to people to do psychotherapy. They really didn't have a structure in place other than the medical model. Okay. So I did. That was an obstacle that I had to encounter along with everyone else. It was easy to do, actually. The idea was to sign up and become part of the system, and how to do that in a minimal way. We did that. I was more interested in the substantial training that was required to do what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
wasn't about licensure. It was about having the competence.
Right.
So that was happening simultaneously. Figuring out the licensure was relatively easy. And a lot of us were grandfathered in under the licensure laws.
Yeah.
But I wasn't that interested because the reason people were doing that were for economic reasons. You could get paid by insurance companies to do the work with people and so on. Wasn't really my motivation. But I felt the obstacles were encountering the requirements of really meeting soul to soul with other people and sorting out what was necessary. And I had to deal with what I would call as the lapse in my skill, my knowledge. And so we were all, I wasn't alone in this endeavor, but training, finding other people who were more skilled. And so I was training in a number of modalities.
Right, that's amazing.
And all of which contributed to a whole. It wasn't just entering a degree program and finishing that. Right. I did get a master's degree in journalism, but it wasn't...
It was not your path?
No, but it was interesting because along the way I met a professor who was, at the time, really doing encounter groups and doing ways of connecting with people that were extraordinary.
Yeah.
And that really accelerated my work in pursue a university degree. But I realized that at some point I would have to find and engage in a formal training, which I did. I eventually found a Jungian analyst who was willing to do a training analysis with me, and we did that for over 6 years. What
is Jungian, just for the viewers who might not be familiar with that?
Jungian analysis is based on the work of Carl Jung, a Swiss psychologist, probably a very important figure in modern psychology.
True. He's almost like known as the father of psychology, or the grandfather.
Well, he has that stature with, he's compared to Freud a lot. Freud was one of his mentors, but no, Jung was asking the right questions, and Jung is still immediately relevant today.
That's true. Yeah.
Even though he died in 1961. I was very attracted to that work.
How did it change your life?
Well, notched it much deeper. I mean, the core was first doing a Jungian analysis.
Yeah.
That was 4 years of work, weekly work with this person, following your dreams. Primarily, Jungian analysis follows the dreaming as if it's the language of the soul, of your soul speaking to you. And so it really attuned me in that way. And then the next level is looking at doing that work with others and analyzing that. So,
did you have strong dreams that was very meaningful to you, or did you find your intuition speaking to you through your dreams?
Well, intuition, it was a part of it, but once you create a structure of analysis, the dreams come in response to it. You have a container. So I was having vivid dreams because it was in analysis and trusting that process of, Jung's core ritual was around the dreaming. So I was wanting to learn that as a craft by doing it myself, by experiencing it.
Yeah.
And then the next level was a training analysis and a control analysis. This was before we had Jungian institutes to do the training where I was living in Boston.
Yeah.
So again, my anti-authoritarianism was definitely ripe to do a transmission. It's really an oral transmission to learn to do this work with someone who knows how to do it better than you.
Yeah.
So I did go through that training. Eventually I became not so much a renegade analyst from the Jungians, but I wanted to develop the skill, and I did while I was living in Boston, Massachusetts, and practiced there. And it was a very interesting time. Like I said, what was going on in the culture. Eventually, the war in Vietnam ended, but we were still culturally a very disrupted environment. So there were a lot of people uncertain. There was a simultaneous to this, there was an increase in the use of drugs and substances.
Right.
And so that's, like I said, we were able to get the funding from the Department of Drug Rehab, but there was something happening in the culture that was radical, you know. This was the late 60s, early 70s, and so I was responding to my culture as well, and the spirituality was only part of it, but it was there. You know, there was a kind of resurgence in that hunger that was collective. There was a opportunity, and teachers would show up. During this time I was training as an analyst, I was also very interested. I wasn't running out as some kind of looking for a guru, but the gurus were showing up. And I did meet a number of very powerful individuals during that period of my life who were available as spiritual teachers, but in a, not to replace the religion of my father, but as again, the search for meaning was at the core of it.
What I'm really hearing, what you're saying, is that you are looking to find your sense of individuality and freedom in a very peaceful way. Because as I'm listening to what you're doing, the ways and the methods that you approach, it's always about where's my freedom within that. Like, even though you have a mentor, even though you have structures that you have to follow, it's you find that middle ground of where you feel neutral, where you feel an alignment with it. And then you stay within that until you find, I want to learn more. I want to expand this place of neutralness that I have.
There was a hunger there that I was feeding for sure. And I don't know about peacefulness, but I was experiencing a calling. This really started, the calling really came when I was maybe 23 years old. But I realized that that calling needed to be fulfilled as well. So I wasn't a workaholic, but I was definitely committed to my work.
How did you know that you had that calling? Because that's what I think where so many of us feel stuck. People feel, how do I know that my calling is calling me? What does it feel like, and what does that look like?
Well,
for you, at least.
A little earlier, I was describing the outer circumstance in which it came. It was practical, just because I was in the situation. How it felt was I felt empowered to be able to be in the helping role with people, not as an egotistical thing, but I had the, let's say, the compassion and the skill to do it. When I really undertook it, I realized, as I said earlier, that I needed to really develop the skill to be as good as I could.
Right.
And so part of having a calling is that you have to fulfill it in terms of live up to the obligation of the calling. And the helping professions were expanding because, like I said, in the culture there was a need, there was a spiritual hunger in the culture as well. And like I said, there were spiritual teachers, not so much as a cultic kind of thing, but they were coming into, at least in the American culture, more available. And I met quite a few beings of high degree, I would call them, who were quite impressive, not in a seductive way, but...
there's knowledge there, there's something to be learned and gained.
Now, of course, a lot of that's come to... These days we see the shadow of the spiritual calling, but we were meditation teachers, people like the Tibetan lineages were becoming available, and I did follow that up. I took refuge with a high Tibetan Lama the Karmapa, who was an amazing being, and was very tantalized by their approach. The Tibetans in general are incredible beings, not because they grew up on the roof of the world, but because they have a clarity in their spiritual pursuit. Right.
I want to touch a little bit back on something that you just said earlier. You said that there is a shadow to a spiritual calling as well. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, I think the hunger has continued to grow collectively in the culture, and there are so many pathways that have emerged that corrupt the basic idea.
That's true.
And so it's very seductive, and I think there's been a lot of confusion and a lot of deception, self-deception as well as deception, that people take advantage of that hunger. And that I've watched that grow over the course of my own life. Certainly, I'm not saying this to judge others, but there's a quality that one has to be aware of, that there are not so much parasitic, but there are people who will prey on that hunger.
And how can we recognize that, especially for people who's just working on or trying to find the spirituality right now, or trying to reconnect to that? How can we recognize that?
Well, that's a good question. I think there are teachings within the spiritual world. The Zen practice actually warns people about it with their teaching stories, that, which I kind of enjoy, because you have to have a sense of humor about it, where you get drawn into a teaching or a practice that is part of the wake-up, is becoming aware of being drawn into something that's really not correct for you. So I'm thinking of, in the Zen tradition, there are stories about masters who, I love this story, this particular one, of a Zen master who's teaching, holding a session of meditation, and one of the students who's been coming for many months and years stands up in the back of the room and shouts, "Look, you're full of shit. I'm through with this. This is bullshit," and storms out of the room. And
oh my goodness!
The Zen master looks at his group and he says, "Oh, took him long enough, didn't it?" The idea being, that one has to differentiate from the collective, and just the idea that it's not just becoming a sheep in a herd, that you have to find your own individuated path in terms of.
That's true.
I had that challenge somewhat, but I was suspect of spiritual teachings. I still am. I still look at some of this stuff that's being fed to people in a gullible way, but I exercise my own sense of caution. I was very fortunate to be exposed to people who I consider beings of, how should I say, the indigenous people have a saying, this is a person of high degree.
Right.
Well, when I met the Karmapa, it was obvious to me he was a person of high degree. And I wanted to know more. I wanted to receive from him. So that's like not a professional calling, but a spiritual calling. Being around him was enlightening. Yeah. Literally, he practiced in a tradition that promised enlightenment, that promised just by being in his presence. And the Karmapa is a very interesting person. There is a series of, the Tibetans believe in reincarnation, so the teachers die and there's a new Karmapa now in the world who's carrying on the tradition. But in the tradition that the Karmapa was teaching, he had a very special practice that he would do. He would go around the world and do a ceremony that was called the Black Hat Ceremony, And the saying that went along with his practice was that if you witnessed his black hat ceremony, it could be a moment of enlightenment just by being in the room when he does it.
Right.
And so I just love the whole tradition of being able to transmit enlightenment.
Yeah.
And it was a mind-blowing process, by the way. It's
right.
Karmapa is still a beautiful phenomenon. Tibetan Buddhism is a beautiful phenomenon. But being able to support someone and serve someone who was doing this practice was part of joining the, taking the vows of Tibetan Buddhism.
Yeah.
And yes, the black hat ceremony was enlightening. I can't say that it wasn't a sugar-coated tablet, but it was a way to experience in between lifetimes. I don't want to go into the whole tradition of the black hat ceremony, but it was a mind. Still, I don't think the new Karmapa is doing the black hat ceremony at this point. He will eventually.
Okay.
But it was a transmission that went all the way back to the beginning of the lineage of Karmapas. I was with the 13th Karmapa. So finding a tradition, a spiritual tradition like the Tibetans was an opening, to seeing what that spiritual hunger is about, how to achieve that state. And Karmapa himself had an effect on people around him. People were not just gravitating toward him because he had magnetism, but he could blow people's minds just by being himself. He was a very clear being.
Talk about the achieving these states. Like, is there any altered states that you have achieved that was very profound for you that you can share with us?
Well, I think when you talk about spirituality, you can't really divorce it from non-ordinary states of awareness. So you begin to notice these, whether they're caused by your taking a drug or whether they're caused by your doing a spiritual practice. Have there been these moments? Well, certainly being present with the Karmapa and watching him create a rain while we're in the middle of this astounding ceremony was an opener. Being around a being like that, someone of extraordinary capacity, certainly was an altered state.
And what would that feel like? Was there a way that you would see things differently? Would you experience certain sensations in your body? Like, how do we know when we are experiencing an altered state that's natural, not necessarily drug-induced?
Well, let me think how to describe it. It's like being between dimensions almost, that something's happening, that someone like the Karmapa had the capacity as an individual to cause this to happen, that you're in between perceptual realities.
Right.
So that in terms of how, let's say, normative consciousness works, it breaks open. All of a sudden you're in between realities caused by, who knows? I'm attributing it to this one being who's very highly developed, person of high degree, but the ceremony itself had evolved. The little long Tibetan horns blaring away, and all the other attendant monks doing puja, meditating intensely. In this one moment, all of a sudden, it's as if the reality cracks open.
Oh wow!
And you're in between these perceptual circumstances. Not going crazy, but just like it's a distortion.
Was it like a difference between a familiar feeling and an unfamiliar feeling that you sensed or felt? Or
well, the
experienced?
familiar feeling drops away, and you're in between. Like I said, it's in the interstices of reality.
Okay.
So it distorts, let's say, how physiologically or psychologically our minds work and our brains work. And it not unlike the hallucinatory state of a psychedelic, but it's happening by these outer circumstances. Yeah. Now, the non-ordinary state that I like to practice through, let's say, the holotropic breath work, this is harnessing the altered state to great use, where you're actually accessing, I won't say higher or lower, you're accessing a different way of being. And the perceptions that accompany it are astounding.
Because I have to say, the holotropic breathing that I did with you, when was this? 2 years ago? It was 2 years ago. And the visions that I had, I'm realizing and I am creating the manifestation of that in the past 6 months.
Beautiful.
Yeah. It was almost like a premonition of this is what's going to happen if you don't take these steps, if you don't build your community, if you don't do this and this and that. I mean, long story short, but I'm living that now. I have actually, now I am embodying and I'm feeling what I was longing for that time, and that's what was coming through.
It's very satisfying to hear you say this.
Yeah. So, like to a T, I kid you not.
I mean, I have a lot of my psychotherapeutic practice has been in this direction of using the non-ordinary state as a healing state.
It was.
Where you see things, where you have a, let's call it intuition for lack of a better word, a visionary state. And so I'm not considering myself a magician or a shaman, but it's shamanic in the sense of opening that possibility where we all become walkers between worlds. That's the definition for me of what a shaman is. Someone who can walk between one reality and another. And, you know, doing that as part of my work has been going on for, let's say, the past 25 years. And I'm not claiming anything extraordinary. It's just part of the path I've been on in helping people, is creating this non-ordinary state. The means of, let's say, the breath work we're talking about is an altered state tool. It's non-drugs, but it's not dissimilar from what people experience when they take entheogens, substances. Although I like the breath work because it's self-regulated. Exactly,
that's why...
you're not surrendering to some force outside of yourself.
And you're not throwing up, nothing, none of that. It's just...
although I have, in my own experience, tried the path of the entheogens. I'm not judging them. I'm just saying there's a way to do this that doesn't require substances. It's a discipline, and it's part of I see it as part of my psychotherapeutic work of creating the ambiance of the non-ordinary state. And I call it the dream time. In the sense, maybe more the Aboriginal sense of the word, entering a state of awareness where you see things and you realize things that normal consciousness doesn't recognize. Now, you were asking if I've had mind-blowing experiences like that spiritually. Well, early on, I'm back, 50 years ago in my life talking about these things, but certainly with learning how to do the breath work and things like that, I've had those big openings, little ones and big ones. And I don't attribute any one moment, but just that continuing awareness of the veils of reality and how to perceive through those veils. And so I would say there's a degree in my work with people where I'm not forcing people to do anything that's extraordinary, but find a way to access their own self-knowledge.
I love that. And also by accessing and helping people to access their knowledge as well, I would love to know, because all that knowledge kind of came together into your beautiful form of spirituality, but what would you say is your definition of spirituality for you? Because this is such an intimate experience and unique experience for all of us, that of course it will look different for, maybe for you than what it would for me, but it's such a beautiful way to hear what different people's perspectives are.
It's not easy to put into a box. I think the context for me is that I would say the psychotherapy that I have practiced for all of these years is soul-centered more than spirit-centered, because soul is how we create a bridge between our ego personality and the spiritual world. So the idea is to recognize that there is, in psychological language, a collective spiritual sphere. Okay, the spirit beyond, let's say, beyond the physical body, beyond the experience of being in the world. And, we're not looking for a direct experience with the gods, but that is essentially what it's about. For religion, it attributes the spirit to the God realms. Yeah. Now, the geography of the spiritual life is not so much about the God realms. It's about being able to have access to something that's beyond my mind, beyond the physical. So spiritual has to be thought of in terms of something beyond.
Yeah.
It's not. When I say soul-centered, the soul that we each contain is the part of it that's in the world, suffering and having pleasure, and that is the bridge to the spirit world. You have to be really grounded in your own strong sense of, let's call it soul. Psyche is the other word we use for it. Psyche means soul. So what psyche bridges us is from a little consciousness, the ego consciousness, the organizing principle of our personality, let's say, is the bridge to the spirit, to the spiritual. So it's through developing soul and making your soul something substantive and real that we can connect to the spiritual.
How can we be more solid within that space of the soul? Is there something, I know it's not a 1 minute answer, but if there's even like a mental biohack or a mindset or a perspective or something that you can share for us in terms of how we can do that?
Well, many people have thought about this and asked the question themselves. I'm thinking of poetry. John Keats said it more beautifully than I think most people. He said, if you want to find out the uses of the world, call this the valley of soul making. That the idea of being in the world is really surrendering to being in the world, to all that it entails, the suffering, the pleasure. Call this the valley of soul making, then you'll find out the uses of the world.
Yeah.
That's what we're here to do, is to create soul, to make a soul. So soul making is the task that we're all set to do by taking a human incarnation. So I would put my answer to the question of, it is the task of living is to create soul, make a soul. Yeah. The stronger that soul becomes, the more the bridge to the spiritual becomes available to us. We're not going to get there without soul. Yeah? We're not going to have the spiritual high at the top of the mountain without having done the work of soul making. Yeah. So now this is a map, I would say, that it's not that other people haven't articulated it, but this is kind of the psychology I see myself practicing, is doing the work of soul making. The key to being a soul-centered psychology is supporting the work of making your soul, dignifying it and making it an important part of your task. The spiritual moments, we're not just looking for the high of realization or enlightenment. They come. They're already embedded in human experience. Yeah. That's the way I look at it, and these moments will occur if you're ready.
That's true.
Being ready is doing the soul-making work. Yeah. So
because then you can receive it.
Yeah, and then you'll perceive it and you'll experience it intensely. So I'm really seeing this language has become increasingly important as I practice my work. Other people have used this language of soul making. The John Keats poetry is a perfect expression of it, but it's kind of what the task is to take a human incarnation is to make a soul, to have the experience of being human and have the lessons that come with being human. And if you think about what soul is, it's not a substance. It's a perspective on things. It's this ability to see things. Yeah. So, soul is a territory between the doer and the deed. Yeah. In between, there's a capacity to really deepen our understanding of what we see.
I love that.
So soul becomes developing that perspective on things. Now, I'm not stealing the definition of soul from anyone else. I'm just saying what substantively it is not like this table. This isn't maybe this table has a soul, but it isn't my soul.
Right.
And can there be soul in other things? Well, frankly, other living beings have soul too.
So is there a difference between a soul and a consciousness for you?
Yes, I think soul is an awareness. It's a perspective on things. Yeah, and early on I used the word reflection. As you reflect on life experience, it strengthens, it builds. It's part of soul making, being having a point of view.
It's like accumulating that data. It's like a sponge that soaks up the water, and the water is the data, the information, the experiences.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the reason I would say soul is important in spiritual life is it's the bridge from our little personality, our ego personality, to something greater. To the spirit world.
I wanted to also ask your perspective on soul, because when we look at soul, is that something that when we pass away, does that soul stay unique to our identity, or does it merge back into something that's much
That's
bigger
a question
or more expansive?
I have never answered.
Okay.
Although it's a good question. It's certainly a...
And there's no wrong or right answer at the end of the day. It's more what we feel we relate to best in terms of what we feel we're in alignment with.
I mean, a lot of people have the curiosity. Does soul travel beyond the body?
Like astral travel,
Is our soul permanent or impermanent? I can't answer that question. I think it's something we all need to ask. So if I'm here in life building soul, making soul, does it go beyond the physical boundaries of our lifetime? Having had a recent medical crisis, going through where you have to face your own impermanence, you tend to lean that way in believing that. Now, I'm not sure grabbing that as a lifeboat, or whether it's an illusion. That's why I'm hesitant to answer the question.
No, of course.
I think most people will go for the lifeboat because it makes them feel secure. Certainly, it's a part of a lot of religious belief that life is goes beyond the physical body.
Because what fascinates me is when you talk to people who have passed over, and then they were resuscitated in the emergency room, and then they come back and they see that I was hanging over my body, and I could see mom was crying, the doctor said this and the doctor said that, and they accurately described actually what was happening. So there was something was happening that brought this data back into the biology of the body.
The same phenomena is true of people who have memories of past lives and doing some recovery of those memories. I'm hesitant to commit to defining that, although these phenomena are undeniable.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to make a judgment call, but in terms of encouraging people to develop their soul so they can connect to the spirit world and have a sense of impermanence.
No, of course not.
But what is the spiritual quest about? Do we want, or what are we hungry for? What's that? When Jung was a practitioner Swiss psychologist, and he was instrumental in helping start the AA movement. I don't know if you knew this.
No,
but
I did not.
Bill Owen, the founder of AA, went to see Jung and get treatment, and they had
Wow, I did not know that.
They had some conversations, and Jung said to him, "Well, look, the thing you're longing for as an alcoholic is spirit. In the bottle we have the spirit."
Yeah.
And so there was that transmission between the two of them about the spiritual longing in alcoholism, and so the idea if you really begin to parse this, and I think that I challenge anyone listening to start thinking about this, the alcoholic is hungry for the spirits in the bottle, for the altered state. So I'm wanting to connect a bridge there. Altered states are how we access the spiritual life. Unfortunately, the alcoholic gets sidetracked by the addiction to the substance or the means. In a way, I'm saying soul is the bridge, just like alcohol might be the bridge as a metaphor to having this spiritual experience. Yeah. And whether we see it going beyond this lifetime or not is not the point. It's having the experience, existentially developing your own capacity to have the connection to the spirit world. Like I said, the shaman is a person who can walk between worlds. Part of the walking between worlds is the spirit world as well. And that, we don't need a map, but the reason I like Jung's psychology is he did create a map. He talked about the unconscious in our understanding, and he used a phrase called the collective unconscious. He said this exists, that there's an unconscious that all people share. This is the realm of the gods and goddesses. Yeah. So the idea that we have access to that through the altered state is an important understanding that I think Jung and Bill W., the creator of AA, came to. The idea of the intoxication of the alcoholic was a spiritual hunger, and we're all hungry for that, and how to create it is that intoxicated state is part of it. I think the idea of intoxication and non-ordinary experience are related.
And drugs, that would include drugs as well, no?
Yes, very much so. It's like the non-ordinary state created by the drug is a visionary state.
That's it. And I love that you said that, because I just made a connection, because when I work with people, and especially people who have drug addictions, what I would ask them is, what is this drug or the feeling of it give you that you feel you cannot feel or experience in your life in the here and now? And that's the emotional resource or the experience that's absent. That's what they're searching for. So they associate the drug with that experience, and that's why it becomes the addiction, because you have to repeat that.
The addiction, we don't want to get too material about it, but I'm addicted to that state of consciousness.
That's it.
That I get from the drug or from the alcohol.
I see it a lot.
Now, that state, we could say it's available through meditation. It's available through the breath work that we've done. The idea that we can voluntarily, willfully experience non-ordinary consciousness. In between, in the interstices of life, we can experience that, not as a permanent state where we're totally drunk all the time, but it's available to us. It's a perceptual availability. How should I say that? Being able to experience the altered state is a kind of a conduit or access to the spiritual. There is a spiritual state attached to it. And I think we misuse the language of spirituality as a kind of a highness, something beyond. The spirit world is beyond the physical world, yes, but it isn't necessarily only at the top of the mountain that we get there. For some people it may be. I would, like I said, I had I had to realize my own impermanence through this illness I was just going through for the past number of months. I wouldn't call it a brush with death, but when you're aware of death, you are aware of your impermanence, the spirit world is hovering around you. You know, you're thinking, if is this death is like a doorway to the spirit world in a way. So you're forced to think about it. Most of us go through life and practice a very human thing, the denial of death. We're not at that doorway all the time. We may go there when we lose other friends or we even a pet. But our own impermanence is part of the illusion of living in the world, is that we have amnesia. That impermanence means the whole screen goes blank, or what happens, you know, that. So I'm just looking at death as a doorway for most of us, and having a physical illness where you're conscious, you're having not so much be frightened about if you die, but what's on the other side of the curtain, you know. And people have near-death experiences and come back and tell you about what happened to them. But the idea of physical impermanence moves us in the realm of the spirit. So it is a shared collective illusion that we all block out the reality of death, you know, and we live as if we're here forever, you know, until something happens that suddenly or otherwise our health deteriorates. And I look at it as, you know, this is a used car I'm driving, this body I've been given. I've got to repair it, I've got to maintain it, but eventually it wears out. Just service
it every now and then.
Yeah, I mean, it did. I recently had to get some serious repair work done. I don't expect to be here forever. It's just apprising oneself of the reality of, being human means impermanence. And so, is there a crossover point, like the bridge into the spirit world? Well, we can't really say. People don't report back from the other side of death to us. It's not part of our truth. So we can speculate.
That's true.
The seeking spiritual knowledge through teachers, that's a whole other kind of spirituality we haven't really discussed. You know, the idea that I've met these enlightened beings who have been willing to share their perspective. Yes, you can have a spiritual practice that creates a state of awareness. I won't say the awareness of what's on the other side of the veil, because that will only be illusory. You know, you may believe it, but it's not. There's no physical proof. I'm reminded in the psychology that I practice, we look at the imagination, and the symbolic reality is also real. And when we look at the religions, the world religions, the truth is that Jesus or Buddha are symbols of some part of ourselves. In Jung psychology, it's the self with a capital S. In the Western world, the most common symbol of the self is Jesus. Being in touch with that part of one's own being that's not even dignified calling it an enlightened part of oneself. The Jesus that's in ourselves, being in touch with that is probably spiritual for most people. And the part of the appeal of practicing collective religion is that promise that you can identify with a symbolic figure like Jesus. And I don't want to take away anyone's fun with religion, but the idea that to see the practice of being in the realm of the gods and goddesses here, we're living here together. We're in the land of the gods and goddesses, or the Hindu practices of there are literally thousands of deities in Hindu practice. And the practice at the Balinese people who live here, they're in communion with the spirit world all the time, every day. So it's possible to use organized religion in this way to understand the connection, to have a spiritual experience. Literally, the Balinese commune with the gods every day. All of them, much in the way that someone who was born in another tradition may not practice the same way, but the practitioners of Christianity can be, let's say, constellating Christ consciousness in their life through their practice. I'm not judging that, I'm not criticizing, I'm just seeing how it functions for us as human beings, that we have a symbolic relationship to the spirit world. It may sound overly intellectual, but it's just how the spirit world is.
It serves a meaning for someone, for a purpose. And
we want that connection to the spirit world, whether we get it through altered states or drugs or practice. Certainly through meditation, we're creating the clarity in our perceptual tools. What comes in those reveries of meditation, we could also call, the spirit world. It doesn't have to take the form of an embodied being to be real to us.
I love that. I also wanted to ask you, while we still have a little bit more time, I wanted to ask you, what is your spiritual practice on a daily basis? Do you have a routine to connect to it, to be in the flow of it? Or what do you do when you maybe feel sometimes a little bit disconnected from it?
Well, I think this goes back to my original experience with the Buddhists, which validated my own sense and let's say the daily practice for me is meditation in action. You don't have to sit in the corner of the room in front of an altar. It can happen as you move through your day. That meditation practice can be in action. So I do meditate. Sometimes I sit down on my meditation pillow and I will meditate. I don't see it as restricted to that one activity. It's a kind of awareness or consciousness that can be put into motion in how we do life. So that's a practical side for me. There's a very good Buddhist meditation teacher in the lineage of the Karmapa, who I mentioned earlier. Chogyam Trungpa was in the same lineage as the Karmapa. In fact, the Karmapa was his spiritual teacher. But he wrote quite extensively in English, and this practice of putting meditation in action. So my practice is I will sit and meditate, but I will also try to have that awareness with me as much as possible during a day. And in between things, in just reflecting in contemplative time, again, there's that word reflection, taking the time to reflect and find meaning in what's happening. And that can be a daily experience that doesn't have to take up gobs of time. It can be momentary awareness, it can be extensive awareness. So I would say that's my spiritual practices. I'm
curious, when you say to find meaning in something that's happening, to what extent? To what does that look like? Because sometimes that can become, for some people, like an obsessive thought, or it can turn into something where they just wanted to have an awareness of something, but their minds can run away with them. So maybe for them, how would you guide them to say, here's how you can practice that point of mindfulness, but not to the point where it's an obsession?
Well, the idea of making meaning is one of the basic human drives. In other words, we can live without a lot of things, but meaning is a sense, that's what sustained us in life. So when things happen, we can obsess about making meaning of it, or just notice it and trust that something will come clear about it, what it meant, what's the significance of an event. So no, it's not about chasing it obsessively, but knowing that there is a dimension of meaning to everything that happens. It may not be obvious to us in the moment, may go away, it may come back to us. That dimension of meaning is essential to human life. So making meaning is something that we don't, it's not like a physical labor, but it's being attuned to that dimension. Something will come of it. We don't have to make it up. But if you have a let's say a meditative mind where you're open, things will appear to and occur to you about what it meant. Maybe years later it'll occur to you. Maybe in the moment it may.
That's true. Actually, that's happened to me as well. I can relate to that. Yes.
That awareness of carrying that awareness that. Of course, there's meaning to everything that happens in life. That you could say it like there are no accidents. Well, no. If we had the perceptual skill to see why something happens, cause and effect. But no, meaning is the dimension of life that's essential to sustain our lives. We make meaning of things. Sometimes we make things up. Sometimes it becomes apparent. There's meaning intrinsic in how we live our lives.
I love that. That's perfect. This was a wonderful conversation with you today. It was very insightful, a lot of golden nuggets that I'm going to take away with me here. And I always love being a student. And when I talk to people who've done such amazing work, such as yourself, it's, I find myself actually becoming a bit of the student even while I'm asking the questions at the same time. So it was really wonderful to, follow your journey and to embody so much of what you shared with us today. So thank you deeply, deeply for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you for your love, your time, your energy, and everything that you do as a light worker for us and for society, and what you contribute. Because sometimes I find that being a light worker or someone that's in service, it can sometimes be a very thankless job. You don't always see the rewards of the ripple effect of what you contribute to people's lives. So sometimes I just feel like I just want to say thank you.
Well, it's nice to hear that.
On behalf of everyone, and to just keep doing the amazing work that you're doing, and just keep being in service and supporting people, because that really is your spirituality. That is your niche in life.
Well said.
Yeah. I love that. So everyone, Jeremiah here with us, and thank you for being here with me today. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you.
Thank you. And everyone, until next time, be the light that you are.